As I said in the previous video, I think the early game of a server in Ashes of Creation is going to be much different than the late game, and I think during Alpha 2 we might see metas start to develop regarding ideal node locations and various rush strategies for guilds to get an early advantage. This is going to be a highly competitive open world game, and as such players will try to min-max to gain an advantage. One of the biggest areas of potential competition is going to be over one of the 5 guild castles available in the open world. The reason I think castles will be so desired is they provide a tremendous amount of benefits to the guilds that own them. Plus it is possible that the defenders of the castle get the advantage during the siege. That is how it worked in Alpha 1, and we will see if that remains the case in Alpha 2. So getting ownership of the castle first to get that potential defender advantage is another reason guilds will be wanting to rush to claim the castle before any other guild. Each of the 5 castles in Ashes of Creation exerts control and pressure over 1/5 of the world map. With a 1,200 kilometer squared world map, that means each castle controls 240 squared kilometers. For reference, the size of the Alpha 1 map was 70 kilometers squared. Doing some pixel count calculations like I did for the map theory crafting video, I came up with this for the size of the castle region and included the Alpha 1 size as well. So what are the benefits conferred to the guild that owns a castle? There are a myriad of benefits, such as the ability to activate special events that benefit the node citizens that are under the influence of the castle. The castle owner can set up relationship with node mayors to help get the 3 supporting castle nodes developed. Special additional buildings can be unlocked within nodes via the castle. Castles can also influence crop yields and resources within the region. The leader of the guild that owns a castle gets a tier 3 royal flying mount, which is something that only 10 to 20 players on the entire server will have at any given time. For each of the castle nodes developed during the month, the guild leader can grant undermounts that can be used by their guild officers during the monthly siege. This is in addition to the other defensive benefits the castle nodes provide during the siege. And the biggest potential benefit to me is the ability to levy taxes. A portion of these taxes must be used within the defense systems of the castle and for building up the castle nodes, but a portion can be used by the guild for whatever they want. And again, the area that the castle is pulling from is a very large area. There are 85 node locations total in Ashes of Creation, and with the castle controlling 1/5 of the world, that means that each castle is pulling taxes from 17 nodes. The potential earnings could be tremendous. The benefits are said to increase the longer the guild owns the castle as well. So getting control of the castle first to get that snowball effect started early is another reason that first ownership could be very desired. But how does the guild take control of the castle for the first time? Well, at the launch of a server, the castles will be controlled by NPC adversaries that are said to be the primary antagonists of the story of Ashes of Creation. We don't know the level of these NPCs, but we do know that these NPCs were said to be very difficult and that guilds would have to level up first before they can defeat them. We don't know the level of these NPCs, but we do know the max player level is level 50 and takes anywhere from 180 to 270 hours to reach. So even if the NPCs are level 30, is going to take quite a while before a guild will have enough players high enough level to attempt to kill these NPCs and take control of the castle. So the first strategy that guilds will have to learn is optimal leveling strategies. And at this stage we don't know a tremendous amount about how that will work, but we do know that the optimal leveling path will not be to stay in one node and level. Players will need to travel around the map and not stay in one area if they want to find the optimal leveling path. We also know that higher level content will not unlock until nodes are leveled up. So optimal strategies for leveling a node will come into play as well. And there might be a specific node type or node location that guilds find is optimal for getting that first castle capture. And I also suspect that due to the open world nature of this game and due to the size of the world map, that each of the 5 starting areas might have a different optimal leveling route. And of course this route will be dependent on which nodes are leveled first. In addition to character levels, you will also need to get their guild members geared up. To do this, many elements come into play. Of course, gold is something that will probably be needed, and I have a series of 4 videos where I did a very deep dive on the Ashes of Creation economy that I think applies to this discussion. In the early game, I do think one of the big methods for guilds to acquire gold will be to maximize the hunting certificate system. In Ashes of Creation, mobs do not drop gold. Instead, they drop hunting certificates that must be turned in at hunter NPCs in nodes for gold. The value of these certificates vary based on the level of the node you turn them in at, the distance to the node you turn them in at, the region you turn them in at, and the number of that type of certificate that are being turned in at that node. Steven has mentioned that players can increase the return of the hunting certificates by maximizing these 4 factors. So the theoretical maximum value of these certificates is to turn them in at a stage 6 node in the furthest economic region from where they were gathered, and at a node where little to none of those certificates are being turned in, as shown in this example. Now early in the game, I don't suspect guilds will have a proper navy and trading systems in place to send their hunting certificates that far. But they might be able to set up an intercontinental trade route between 2 regions that is optimal in the early game. This could be a way to get a good amount of gold generation going. In addition to gold, guilds will absolutely need to be gathering raw materials and supplying them to their processors, who will in turn supply the crafters with the finished materials. So the caravan trade route they set up for hunting certificates will also be used for transferring gatherables to the locations needed for the processors and crafters. The more guilds can optimize their caravans and fill them to capacity while successfully defending them, the faster they can achieve their goal of castle ownership. And it is important to note that the processing artisan class is said to be the bottleneck in the artisan system. So a guild might want to plan ahead for this, ensure that they have more processors than they do gatherers and crafters. And I think there's a decent chance that the processors will need to acquire freeholds, because it has been said that the best processing happens on freeholds. So it will depend on the level of the NPCs, but I would not be surprised if a guild will need to have a pretty good amount of their processors owning freeholds before they can defeat the castle NPCs. And we do know that acquiring a freehold will be no easy task. So with the processing branch being the artisan system bottleneck, and with freeholds being vital to the processing branch and something that is not easily acquired, guilds will want to absolutely focus on ways to optimize helping their processors attain freeholds. This could be one of the biggest keys to attain control of the castle for the first time. Players might find optimal methods for leveling certain crafting professions, which would require certain materials to be farmed. But once they achieve a high enough crafting level to make the gear needed to defeat the castle NPCs, the focus will shift to gathering and crafting the gear needed. This will probably require a massive amount of certain materials, so gathering these materials as early as possible to start stockpiling them will be important. So gatherers will need to know ahead of time what materials are the most important for achieving the guild's goals so they can focus in those areas. Gatherers will also need to level up the higher tier materials, so optimal farming routes to level gathering will probably be found. Certain consumables might also be found to be vital for these castle NPC fights, so guilds will want to craft as many of these as they can before fighting the NPCs. And certain world bosses or dungeons might be needed to get the materials that only drop from these bosses and are needed for crafting the correct gear. So strategies for killing these bosses might need to be devised as well. And finally, learning the castle NPC fight and optimal ways to defeat them is another component guilds will try to optimize. So as you can see, if a guild wants to secure the first castle ownership on a server, there is a lot they will need to do ahead of time. They need to level up several nodes, level up their gatherers, processors, and crafters, farm gold by maximizing their hunting certificate returns, farm the correct materials to make the right gear and consumables, which includes gathering professions and probably will include farming certain bosses and dungeons. They will probably need to have a fairly significant number of their processors owning freeholds in order to process the higher level materials. And they will also need to learn the mechanics of the NPC fight once they are ready to fight them. And I expect this to be one of the more interesting races we have ever seen in an MMO, because there is so much involved with this race. In Ashes of Creation, the artisan system actually matters. Yes, players might get some gear drops from bosses, but the majority of the gear will be made by crafters. The complexity of what is involved to get that first castle makes this very interesting to me. I can't wait to see how this plays out once we finally get in-game. If you guys haven't signed up for an Ashes of Creation account yet, my referral code is in the description. If you liked the video, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next video.